All right, let's talk about race and ethnicity. These are words we hear thrown around all the time, but what do they actually mean? Well, if you look at it through a sociological lens, they're these incredibly powerful ideas that, honestly, shape our world in some really profound ways. So let's take a closer look at how that all works. So, to get started, I want to take you back to a specific time and place, Sanford, Florida, back in 2012. Something happened there on one single night in February that would end up sparking a conversation about race that literally echoed all around the globe. A 17-year-old kid, Trayvon Martin, was just walking home. He was black, and a neighborhood watch coordinator reported him as suspicious. That same person then shot and killed him. As you can imagine, this tragedy led to this massive public outcry. You might remember the Million Hoodies rally in New York City that was all in response to this. And of course, it raised this huge, critical question that people are still debating today. Did race play a role in his death? Now, to even begin to tackle a question like that, you need the right tools. We need to get a handle on the language sociologists use. It's like building a toolkit so we can think about these concepts a little more clearly. Okay, so let's start building that toolkit, and we have to start with the absolute basics. We're going to decode some of these essential terms because honestly, getting the definitions straight is step one to seeing the whole bigger picture. All right, first up, race versus ethnicity. I think we all kind of use these words interchangeably, right? But from a sociological point of view, they're actually pretty distinct. Race, that's usually about superficial physical differences that a society decides are important. Ethnicity, on the other hand, is all about shared culture. Think language, religion, values, all those traditions that bind a group together. And this is where things get really, really interesting. It's this idea called the social construction of race. I mean, get this. Pretty much all major scientific organizations agree that race isn't a biological fact. There's no race gene. Instead, it's a super powerful idea that we, as a society, created. We assigned meaning to it over time. And because we made it up, those categories can and absolutely do change. Okay, that brings us to another term, minority group or subordinate group. Now, a really common mistake is to think this is just about numbers, like whichever group has fewer people. But it's not. Sociologically, it's all about power. A subordinate group is any group that gets singled out for unequal treatment and just lacks power in that society. A classic, really stark example is apartheid in South Africa. The black population was the numerical majority, but they were absolutely the subordinate group. So, the big question is, how do these categories we've created actually lead to real-world inequality? Well, it's a process. It kind of builds on itself, starting with our own internal thoughts, then moving to our external actions, and eventually, it can get baked into the very systems that make up our society. A lot of times, it all kicks off with stereotypes. We all know what these are, right? They're just oversimplified ideas about entire groups of people. And it doesn't matter if they seem positive or negative. The real problem is that they completely erase individual differences. It's like saying everyone in a huge, diverse group is exactly the same. And those stereotypes, they often become the foundation for both prejudice and discrimination. Here's the key difference, and it's pretty simple. Prejudice is the biased thought or feeling. It's what's going on inside your head. Discrimination is the action. It's when those thoughts turn into real-world behavior that affects people's ability to get a house or a job, their actual lives. But it goes even deeper than that. What happens when prejudice and discrimination stop being just about individual people and their actions? What happens when it gets woven into the very fabric of a society, into its laws, its schools, its entire economic system? Well, that's what sociologists call institutional racism. And the really crucial part to get is that it can keep going on its own, even if there aren't a bunch of openly racist individuals actively pushing it. So with all this in mind, how do different racial and ethnic groups actually interact with each other? Well, sociologists have kind of mapped out a whole spectrum of possibilities, ranging from the absolute worst, most intolerant ways, all the way to the most respectful and accepting. Yeah, so this spectrum covers a lot of ground. On the one terrible extreme, you have the most destructive interactions, things like genocide or expulsion. Then, somewhere in the middle, you've got things like segregation and assimilation. And then all the way on the other end, you have the ideal, which is called pluralism. You might have heard it called the salad bowl model, where all the different cultures keep their own unique identities, but they all contribute to the whole. Okay,
I know these can feel like pretty abstract ideas, so let's try to ground them in some real-world examples from the history of the United States. I think seeing how these concepts actually play out makes them a whole lot clearer.
So let's zoom in on just one of those, segregation. Sociologists actually break this down into two types. You have de jure segregation. That's segregation by law. It's literally written into the legal code. Then you have de facto segregation. This is segregation that happens in fact, through social pressures or economic forces, even when there's no specific law that says it has to be that way.
And this photo here, this is a really powerful, stark example of that de jure, or by-law segregation. For almost 100 years after the American Civil War, a whole system of laws called Jim Crow laws legally required separate facilities for Black and white Americans. Signs just like this one were an everyday sight in the American South.
And this contrast is it's incredibly powerful, isn't it? On the one hand, you have the Statue of Liberty, this global symbol of freedom and a place that welcomes everyone. And on the other hand, you have a sign that legally enforces separation and inequality. That tension, right there, between the big ideals of a country and the day-to-day reality for so many of its people, that is such a central part of understanding the story of race in America. So, okay, we've looked at the definitions, we've looked at the systems, we've even looked at a little bit of the history. So what's the big takeaway here? What's the most important thing to hang on to?
I think the most crucial point is this. Even though race is not a biological reality, it is a profound social reality. It's a system of labeling people that ends up shaping everything from our identities to our opportunities in life. These labels, even though they're socially constructed, have immense power and very, very real consequences.
And that really leaves us with one last question, something for you to think about. I want you to consider your own community, whether you're in the US or Taiwan or anywhere else in the world. How did the labels and the social categories that we all use every single day, sometimes without even thinking about it, how did they shape the world that we see? And maybe more importantly, how did they shape the world we're building for everyone else?